This is Damian Macy. I'm representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library for our oral history project. It is Tuesday, October the 13th of 2015. And I'm at the library today with Mr. Bill Weiser, a resident of Marshall and a native of this community. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Bill and let him tell his story.
What a story. Well, I was born in January the 13th of 1939. My parents were Bob and Dale Weiser. I have no brothers or sisters, very few relatives left. Lived here all my life except when I was at the University of Illinois and when I was in the Army.
Where did you go to school, Bill?
Well, I went to the North School back in the old days, which is no longer exists, and from there I went to the U of I. Graduated from there in 1963.
When you were at the old Northside School, do you remember any of our teachers?
Mrs. Venus was my first grade teacher. We had no kindergarten at that time.
No.
Mrs. Connerton was the second grade. Who was the third grade?
When I was there, it was Irene
Mrs.
Klein.
Connerton might have been the second and third grade both. I'm not sure.
I had Mrs. Connerton for second, and then Irene Klein was the third grade.
Okay, that's right. Irene
You had the
Klein.
same ones?
And Mrs. Irwin was the fifth grade teacher, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong on that one.
Let's see, I had for fourth grade Ethel Hutchison.
No, I didn't have her.
Okay.
Mrs. Venus, Mrs. Connerton,
Klein,
Mrs. Klein.
and then Irwin, you said?
Irwin was in there someplace right real close. And then Mrs. Geyser was sixth grade, if I'm not mistaken.
I moved to Martinsville after the fourth grade, so I'm not sure who all was.
Miss Geyser, I think.
Yes, it was.
I think she was a single lady.
Do you remember the school? Could you kind of describe it?
Do what now?
Can you kind of describe the school?
Well, it was a big old, two-story building? Maybe three. Three. Had a fire escape, but they would never let us try. I always wanted to go down that slide on the top floor, but they wouldn't let us. It was condemned, I think, at that time. We had, I don't remember how many people we had in our class. No sports to speak of. We played softball in the spring. That was about all the athletics we had in grade school.
There wasn't a lot of playground equipment either, was there?
Slide and some swings and blacktop that they played tag on.
And everyone still had a good time and had some fun.
Oh yeah, scraped knees and whatever.
As I remember, the third floor was one kind of big room that had a skylight, and Von Arne came from high school, and we had a music class once in a while with him.
Yeah, I didn't really participate much in the singing. I cannot carry a tune in a bucket. Like I said, I always wanted to try that fire escape, but they wouldn't let us. I think one kid in our class finally got away with it, but he got punished for it.
Uh-oh, that took all the fun out of it, didn't it?
Well, I guess it was worth it. I would have tried it if I'd had a chance, I know that.
In high school, did you have a favorite class?
My favorite teacher was Mrs. McNary in Latin. I took
Oh, really?
4 years of Latin, I think. That, and of course, the PE course was good. Played football and I ran track. I gave basketball up my freshman year because I couldn't get along with the coach.
Do you have some hobbies or things that you remember maybe from, as a youngster?
Do what now?
Some hobbies?
Oh, I like the shooting sports now. Guns, shotguns, rifles, pistols, whatever. I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting trap with my dad.
Did you have some household duties around home when you were growing up? Some chores, shall we say?
Chores, well, other than carrying coal and ashes and mowing the yard, the old man was really pretty lenient. He was a truck driver and he was out of town a lot, but whenever I got in trouble, it was always, wait till your dad gets home.
Well, you mentioned stoves. I know that was basically the only source of heat that people had, was a stove and a coal.
We had coal until we lived down on 1111 Plum Street. When I was growing up, until I went to, what was it, 8th grade, we bought a house from Percy Stanfield at 912 North Michigan, 712 North Michigan Avenue. Brand new little prefab.
Was that? Oh, that was one of the national homes, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's still standing, believe it or not. Of course, we had to walk to city people. We had to either ride a bike or walk to school. I'd like to say it was uphill both ways, and sometimes it was.
Depending on how well the school day went, huh?
Yeah. And of course, up there, we had one neighbor that had a son was just a couple years older than me. We had Glenn Rhodes was there.
Oh, yeah.
We played a lot of football, whatever.
There were a few vacant lots around in that area too at that time.
At that time.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnny Warwick was the other neighbor that we had. Glenn Rhodes, and that's about it. His sisters, he had several sisters, Glenn did. Johnny was the only son like me.
How has that, in your mind, how has that area and that neighborhood changed?
Well, after my dad died, my mom sold it when she remarried. And it's, most of those prefab houses are still standing and still being lived in. Believe it or not. And that was back in we moved up there in 51 or 2.
Didn't Percy Stanfield build or develop that whole area and build most of those houses?
Those houses, all those prefab were built by Mr. Stanfield. I spent several summers working for him and farming when I was in high school and junior high. We did everything from painting houses to barns to farming, driving a tractor and stuff.
What were the crops mostly at that time? Was it corn?
Corn and beans. And silage. They put Stanfield in those days. Put a lot of silage.
Did he have a lot of cattle?
I think he must
I
have.
think he at that time might have.
That's been so long ago, I'd almost forgot about him.
Was he mayor at that time?
No, he had a dealership for Alice Chalmers tractors over here where the,
And Studebaker.
and Studebakers. We bought a Studebaker. And my dad bought the first car we ever owned was a Ford from over here. From Stanfield, matter of fact, and he had
That's right.
he had a car, tractor dealership over there that burned down, and the Studebaker dealership was over there.
Excuse me.
Another story in that area. Dad bought a Pontiac, 53 Pontiac, or not Pontiac, Studebaker from him.
Well, as I recall, about that time, there were 5 car dealerships, I believe, in Marshall.
I think so. Yes.
Studebaker.
Plus used cars. They had several
Yeah.
used cars too. Dealerships.
There's Clotfeller's Hudson over on the west side of the
side.
square.
Studebaker was
Yeah.
Percy Stanfield's and a Ford there, or Flowers, or
Pontiac.
Archer.
And then Doc Simpson had the Chevrolet Buick place.
Yes.
And then Stanfield ultimately, somewhere along the way, I think owned that one.
That's been quite a while ago.
That's again.
Flowers had the Pontiac dealership. It was right across the street.
Yeah. And as I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, he had John Deere appliances or implements too, didn't he?
Who's that?
Flowers.
Yeah, but I don't know where he had it. It was Pontiac mainly over here. I don't know where he kept his tractors and stuff. I don't remember.
Well, after leaving Marshall, you said you went to school, I believe, at the U of I.
University of Illinois, yes.
And what did you major in up there?
Well, I started out in pre-veterinary and I didn't make it in that, or lost my enthusiasm for it anyhow, and I ended up in agriculture. I got a degree in agriculture from there later. That was 1963 when I got out. Went straight into the military, the Army. Never left the country.
Oh,
I was in service during the Vietnam War, I guess, if you want to call that a war.
where was your basic training?
Went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, or St. Louis. What is that down there?
Fort Leonard Wood?
Fort Leonard Wood.
Oh my.
From there we went to Fort Polk, Louisiana.
I'll bet you really loved Fort Leonard Wood, didn't you?
We had the modern new barracks, brick buildings, and
Oh my, you had it lucky then.
we were one of the first ones in the new barracks down there. Of course, it was a 3-story buildings, and ours was on the 3rd floor, top floor.
I was down there, but in the old wood World War II barracks that were a disaster.
We went to basic down there, and we got out of that, and got 2 weeks leave, and we had to be in Fort Polk, Louisiana for advanced training, and thank goodness, I guess, I didn't have to go overseas. I was headed, according to the draft lady over in Martinville, I was headed for Vietnam, but I didn't have to go.
You're glad you got sidetracked then, aren't you?
Well, that was another bad story. I was in college and see, I had deferments while I was going to school, you know, and she didn't like the fact that I could get a deferment. We called her old Olive Oil, the old gal that ran. I don't know what her real name was. But the day I come down and told her I'd joined the reserves and at school, she had the papers made out for me to be drafted, and she just throwed a fit. Had the stamp on it, ready to bail. But it turned out there wasn't anything she could do about it.
I was going to say, as long as it's legal and
It
it's
was
part of the
all
program, why?
above board, and I'd been going to meetings all along. The only problem was I didn't tell her, which I didn't know I was supposed to. Anyway, shortly thereafter, they did away with the draft, you know.
Were you in Louisiana during winter weather or summer weather? Do you recall?
I went into service in St. Louis in March.
Okay.
We had our camp out the 7th week. We went to the week in the woods, you know, went outside, and we had to sleep in 2-man tents on the ground. And we had anything from snow to rattlesnakes to hail to water, everything that week. And it was, I guess it was fun for a while.
Well, I went down there for basic training also, and I guess that's why I have no interest, no desire to go camping. That just killed
my
me.
camping
Oh, yeah.
spirit. I lucked out. I got a truck driving job down there by not volunteer. Everybody volunteered for it, they wouldn't take, and I wouldn't volunteer for nothing. Not the first thing. Kept my mouth shut and did what they told me to do, and because of not volunteering, they made me a truck driver down there. So everybody else had to walk 14 miles, and I drove a truck. There was three of us older guys. Of course, by the time I got into the Army, I was 22 or 3 years old, which is the cause of the ruckus in Martinsville that she didn't like. And there was three of us older guys over there, and we didn't volunteer for the truck driving job, and they picked off three of us. But we hadn't made in that part of it.
That doesn't usually happen.
No. And of course, I had 7 years of obligation to the military for meetings and stuff, weekends and what have you. And it was.
So where did your pattern take you then after leaving the military?
I went to work in south of Lake Forest, some little town, suburb, for a veterinarian, Dr. What's his name? He was Jewish, Dr. Goldberg or something like that.
Would that have been in Skokie?
No, it was 14 miles south of Lake Forest on Route 41. I think it was Route 41 instead.
Okay.
4-lane highway, 2 lanes each way, stop and go traffic, and they take you from anywhere from, you could drive 14 miles in a half hour at the speed limit. And it would, most days it would take anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours to get there.
And it's still that way, even worse. Well, there's
always a wreck or traffic congestion, and it was miserable.
just north, there's Evanston, and then there's Wilmette is a small town. Winnetka, Highland Park, and some of them along there.
We lived in, well, I said Lake Forest, but it was really Highland Park. We rented after I got married, my wife was from up there, and we rented an apartment in a garage, a 3-story or 3-car garage, and the upper floor was a really nice apartment. And when I got out of the service, I couldn't find a job, and finally got on a Eli Lilly. I wished I'd have stayed there, but I didn't. And we lived there, and then my mother had some medical problems. She had remarried Mr. Parker, or Ed Parker, and she was having some halfway serious medical problems. She was in the hospital, and he offered me a job down here at the parts store, and I took it. And I spent 30 years in the parts business. Ended up buying the place. And I ended up with 39 years, I think, down there.
Really? Okay. That was called Parker Auto Supply,
Parker
wasn't it?
Motor Supply.
Motor Supply, okay.
407 Archer Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I went to work down there, and I ended up buying the place when he retired. I sold that. I thought I was going to retire, and I spent about 3 months, and that took all the fun out of retirement. I thought, boy, this will be all right. I can hunt and fish and go to the sportsman's club and shoot all day long. And the first 3 weeks to a month was great.
Then it got old, did it?
Yeah, well, I was the only one that was doing anything, you know. None of my friends, they all had to work. And here I am by myself. I would have gotten a whole bunch of trouble, I guess, at home. So I went to work over at Casey Tool and Casey Machine and Tool. And I spent almost 15 years there, 10 of it on third shift. I ended up as a supervisor there, and finally they transferred me to day shift. I spent maybe 5 years on day shift, which was a decent job, and they finally went bankrupt, closed the place down. And then I did retire. Health problems.
What year was that, Bill?
2008.
Okay.
The last day I worked, November 2008. Mr. Yates was a real nice gentleman to work for.
Is that Bob Yates?
Yeah.
I know him.
I can say nothing bad about that man.
There's Jim Yates.
Jim's his son.
Son?
Jim was the old man that I worked for.
Oh.
That's who I'm talking about. Jim Yates Sr.
Yeah, that's the one that I know.
His son ended up with a business, and he went too big too quick.
Jim's wife and my wife were good friends. They were classmates here in Marshall.
Well, she started that church over there.
She was a minister of the
She was a minister. But Mr. Yates,
pastor or whatever.
I could say nothing bad about that man. He's a wonderful man.
So that retirement in 2008, then did it seem a little more like retirement and what it ought to be?
Well, yeah, but it was still hard to get used to, very hard to get used to, and it's still not what it ought to be.
Do you have some hobbies that are
Man,
using some of your time?
Fishing and shooting guns and stuff, but that's about it anymore. I'm not able to get out and do what I like to do. If I'd have known what I know now, I'd have taken better care of my body.
We can all kind of look back and rear vision.
Yeah. It's
When you came back to Marshall after living in the city land for a while, did your image of Marshall change, or do you think, hey, this is a pretty good place after all, or gee, what am I doing back here?
I didn't really want to go where we went, but my wife had a job up there at the time, and of course she wanted to be around her folks. And I couldn't handle the city life. Just too many people. too big town for me.
I think one of the big frustrations is the driving and the traffic. As you said, 15 miles or a few, should take only a few minutes, but it usually takes much more time.
Veterinarian I worked for up there wanted me to go back to vet school, and he paid for me to go.
Wow.
What was that? Down right in the heart of Chicago to school. We had bought a '63 Bonneville convertible up there when I got out of service, and I drove down to Chicago one night to school. It was night school, of course. I was working full time at the vets. Drove all the way to Chicago. Left it. Well, my class started at 7:30, something like that. And drove all the way down there and found a place, a parking lot right there by the school to park. And I was taking physics and a chemistry class. I went in that night. We spent 3 hours. I got home went straight home when I got out of class. I got home at 1 o'clock in the morning on those roads up there. I had to be at work at 7 o'clock the next morning.
That makes a pretty short night, doesn't it? Was the car in okay shape when you came out too?
Well, that's just part of the story. One reason I didn't go back. I walked out of that, and it was in 1963. We just bought the car, and I parked it down there, and I came back, and there was a crowd of people in the parking lot around it, and one big colored cop. Of course, I went up to my car and started getting in it, and he stopped me. "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going home. It's in my car." "Well, I'll have to see our driver's license, your insurance, and this, that, and the other, and proof of ownership." And I says, "Is it going to be like this every night?" That was one night of that, and I quit.
Was the car okay, or was there any damage to it? Or anything?
No, the car was all right.
Oh, okay.
But it's just a matter of the struggle that, and it looked to me like it was going to be that way from then on. And
You decided this is not for me, huh?
this is not for me. And shortly thereafter, I got an offer for a job down here, and we moved down here. And been here ever since.
Bill, you mentioned Eli Lilly. Did you work for Eli Lilly in the Chicago area then?
It was in Waukegan,
Waukegan, okay.
north of us.
Oh, yeah.
That was another hour and a half drive, I suppose. Hour anyhow.
Oh, yeah.
Worked second shift there. And
So when you moved back, were you able to transfer your job in Lilly there to the one over in Terre Haute?
I never even asked. I was so glad to get out of Chicago or Lake Forest that I didn't care whether I transferred anything or not. I never even asked. Already had a job, and my ex-wife, she went to work down at TRW and as a beautician both. We made a go of it.
What was her reaction to Marshall? What was her reaction to Marshall being such a small town out in the middle of corn and bean fields?
She does. We lived here for several years, but she didn't fit in. It just didn't work. We had 4 kids through that marriage, and 4 nice daughters, and a rough divorce, and
Are your Do any of your children live around in this area?
One of them is still in this area. The other three are Haywood, Illinois. The next one is in Haywood, and one is in Peoria, and one is in Springfield.
Oh, really, they're still within the Illinois
They're
area then?
all still in Illinois. It was, just say the divorce was not friendly and let it drop at that. Some hard feelings. Anyway, I found somebody else, and we've been married for 25 years, and she's a wonderful person.
Now, is she from the Marshall area?
Yeah. Local gal, and she's still working in Terre Haute, drives to Terre Haute 5 days a week to work.
She knows every pothole in Route 40 and Route 70.
Yeah, and her health's not good now, but at least she's still working. Between the two of us, we have 8 pretty good kids, a bunch of grandkids, and a few great grandkids.
Okay. Does your wife have a target date out there that she says she might retire?
She says she wants to work because she doesn't want to stay at home.
Okay.
Said she wouldn't get anything accomplished staying home, and so she's going to work. So she's the boss on that. She's been at that job, well, this current place now, for probably 15 years.
What type of work does she do?
She's accounting.
Oh,
She's a local girl. Her name was Ziegler,
okay.
Jack Ziegler's sister.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
She's
Does,
basically been really good for me.
That's great. Bill, is there some person in your lifetime that has really had a big influence on you?
Well, there could probably be several I could mention, but I don't know. My stepfather was good for me. Ed Barker.
Okay.
Mr. Yates and Casey was good for me.
Okay. Bill, is there a world event or something historically event that has really had an impact on you?
Well, 9/11 was a rough one.
It is. And I bet you remember where you were and what you were doing.
Yep. I was still in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Me and a coworker were eating lunch together when that happened. No, I'm wrong. That was when John F. Kennedy got assassinated. We were eating lunch together, and then 9/11 was when that happened. I was working in Casey on the night shift, Casey 2. Came home and watched all that on TV. That was a bad day.
It's just something like that. It can't be happening, I think we feel like. Or at least not here in the United States.
And I still don't understand why they let Saddam get by so long as they did. They had to know where he was at. The government had to know.
It seems like there's so many things right now. The world is up in the air. So many terrible things happening. It just doesn't seem like it should be.
Yeah.
We have so many modern things around us all everywhere. Is there something that you just say, really, my gosh, I just simply could not live without that device or that item?
No, I don't really think so. Not really.
Are you involved at all in the texting and the computerizing and all of the modern technology of that
I'm
stuff?
not a computer person.
Okay.
I fought a computer at the business for years and finally got one, and they're all right. But my grandkid could do more on a computer than I'll ever know. And it's just like these modern cell phones. Everybody's got to have a smartphone. And I've got just an old cheapie that
Well,
I could work.
that's what I've got. I call it my dumb phone.
Yeah,
I can make a call and I can get a call, and that's really all I need it for.
that's all I wanted it for. Is if I get out on the road, I can call for help, and that's the only thing I need a phone for.
But you
Don't
see
like
everyone
talking
going
on
down the
phone
street,
anyhow.
especially the kids, they're too busy texting to even know if they're aiming for a telephone pole or not.
Yeah. It's a lot of modern conveniences are just that, a convenience, I guess, but I don't,
I think what you're saying is there's something you can very well live without.
yeah,
Well, Bill, it's been a real pleasure and fun visiting with you.
I'm glad.
One question I usually ask about everyone is a final question. If you're somewhere else in the country or another country, and you said, I'm from Marshall, Illinois, and someone said, where's that, or what's that about? What would you tell them about Marshall and why they might want to even visit here?
Just another small town, and I wouldn't live anyplace else. Marshall's been good for me, and I don't give back as much as I've took from Marshall. That's just the way I am, I guess.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot of loyalty to Marshall, and we're glad to have you as a part of the community. And also, Bill, we've appreciated you participating in our oral history project. That's been great. And this isn't necessarily for someone to read tomorrow or next year or even the year after, but it's for the future. And someone maybe one of your grandkids or something may say, gee, I didn't know that about him. And they read some of this way out in the future. So it's been a delight and real fun having you. And thank you so much for your time
Thanks for
and being with us.
giving me the time.
Well, it's been great.